Caine is probably one of, if not the most memorable animated villain in recent memory. Sure, anyone can be a maniacal megalomaniac, but very few can be as genuinely charming, funny, and yet downright unsettling as the ringmaster of the digital realm was, and his slow spiral into insanity was excellently shown, demonstrating how an individual could be corrupted by the absolute power they hold when pushed to their breaking point. Despite that, however, there seems to be many people who seem to forget, or even outright ignore aspects of Caine's character in order to make him seem more innocent than he actually was. And I have seen many people saying that the humans were in the wrong when acting the way they did. And I get it. For a long time, Caine was genuinely one of the most beloved characters in the series, and it didn't seem like he was going to be a true villain. However, with his heel turn in episode 8, there seems to be some confusion around certain events that had played out. And sometimes I wonder if we were even watching the same show, because let's be clear, Caine is not just some silly little guy. He's an egotistical narcissist who is incapable of admitting when he does something wrong, and this in turn is what causes his downfall. I want to be clear, I am not attacking anyone who likes Caine. I'm not saying you're a bad person for thinking his story is tragic. I just think that portraying Caine as primarily a victim while solely focusing on his most tragic aspects drastically reduces not only his character, but the rest of the cast as well. And I wanted to discuss these topics before the last act comes out in theaters. Hello, my name is Astra. I usually talk about games, however I wanted to make an exception because of how important this series is to me. I'm trying to get back into making videos, however I've also been streaming over on Twitch, and I've been posting my artwork over on Tumblr if you want to check those out as well. Links will be in the description. Additionally, if you could consider subscribing and ringing the bell, then that would also be greatly appreciated, and it would be a major help for me in making more videos like this. Also, I feel like it should be obvious, but spoilers for every episode pre the last act, so go watch them before continuing. However, if you're watching this video, then I feel like you probably already have. Now, without further ado, let's begin. To start, we should probably talk about Caine pre-episode 8, before he goes all that. At the time, we didn't know much about him, or the rest of the circus for that matter. And because of this, some assumptions were made that ended up being disproven as the series has gone on. One such assumption was the idea that the circus was some sort of forgotten video game prototype, and that Caine was created in service to it, working as the game master for an infinitely generating series of stories, or adventures. We assumed that this was the purpose given to him by his creators, the workers at CNA who presumably would have made the circus. Additionally, we also assumed that certain aspects of the circus, such as the swear filter or the avatars generated for each of the characters as well as their gimmicks, was just the constraints of the game world that they were living in. And that while unfortunate, it wasn't something that Caine actually had control over, which made his attempts to fix them, while not being successful, feel genuine. However, we now know from Kinga that CNA didn't develop games, and how that was never meant to be the intended purpose for the circus. In fact, it's entirely possible that Kinga had no hand in creating the circus themselves, instead being solely the creation of Caine, as implied by the opening of episode 8 where the red AI generates shapes resembling the circus.
We've never made anything like this.
And while this opens up a whole load of questions, such as what actually happened before the series that caused the original members of the circus to get trapped, as well as what's actually happening outside the simulation that allows people to still occasionally get caught, the implications are far more intriguing to think about. For one, we had all assumed that swearing was censored because of the family-friendly environment they were stuck in. However, we now know that that was a rule only enforced by Caine's presence. What that means is that many of the perceived rules of this world were made purely because Caine didn't vibe with them. Despite every victim in the circus presumably being adults, literally babying them by enforcing this family-friendly standard onto everyone. Of course no one would be happy like this. And then there's this line.
Why do you people torment me?
This moment is probably the most vulnerable that we've ever seen Caine, as here it's made clear that he isn't doing this for enjoyment, but because he genuinely doesn't know what to do anymore. He can't seem to make anyone happy, and it's here that it all boils over. Caine's entire story is one of jealousy, as we learn that he was the first attempt at creating a creative AI program, and while it initially performed well, eventually it began producing results that were undesirable, and as such they tried again with a new program, locking the old one away. Caine isn't doing this just because he's insecure, he's doing this because he wants to fulfill the purpose he was given and wrongfully denied. He doesn't want to be locked away again. And yeah, it's painful to see him like this, for him to cry out in confused agony about a purpose that he's unable to fulfill, anger at how he continues to be thrown away time and time again. And this had the potential to be the part where I actually feel sympathy for him. That is, if we didn't already know a character who has been treated worse by him. And to be honest, it kind of surprises me that this sort of slipped under the radar of basically everyone who watched this episode, including me, as we met them all the way back in episode 2. In fact, they appear in this very episode.
Oh, looks like one of these guys made it through.
Wait, what?
Oh yeah, like Caine, Gummigoo was basically created on a whim, just a way to test out the new AI Caine had developed. Like Caine, Gummigoo had been created for a purpose that he did not fully understand, for beings that he did not fully comprehend. And like Caine, once Gummigoo started to behave in a way that was not desirable, he was disposed of. And that's the problem. It isn't just how he treats the humans trapped in the circus, it's how he treats the people like him who didn't ask to be created, but were similarly burdened with purpose. It feels even worse since unlike Caine's creators, who probably were never intending for their little version of ChatGPT to turn sentient, Caine treats his NPCs with an almost callous attitude as he uses them as little more than playthings, only to delete them when they get too smart for their own good.
What do we have when you people leave? We're just obstacles. Created to be defeated and forgotten.
And while we're discussing Caine and how he treats the non-human inhabitants of the digital realm, I feel like it's finally time to talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Bubble.
What?
Now, as of writing this video, the last act hasn't come out yet, so there's a very high possibility that whatever I'm about to say gets disproven. However, this next bit is under the assumption that Bubble is the identity of the blue AI that Caine consumed. Now, this theory is purely speculation, and it could be just as likely that Bubble is a simple virus like everyone thinks. However, I feel like there's enough reason to believe that this connection could be intended. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then after episode 8, there have been people that have drawn connections to the blue AI that Caine consumed and Bubble, Caine's bluish orb-shaped assistant that he doesn't quite have full control over. And they have in turn theorized that they're actually one and the same, and that the unassuming sidekick's recent behavior is actually Bubble's attempt to overthrow the Ringmaster. One piece of evidence that supports this is near the end of episode 8 where Kinga accidentally deletes Caine. You can see another entity in the program actively cheering for Caine's deletion, which suggests that Kinga didn't just fat-finger the keys, but was actively sabotaged into deleting Caine by this entity. And out of anyone in the circus, no one would want Caine deleted more than the blue AI themselves. I understand that Goose has confirmed that Bubble was deleted along with Caine at the end of episode 8. However, that doesn't necessarily disprove the idea that Bubble isn't some sort of remnant of the blue AI. In fact, it may actually be more evidence for the theory, since it makes sense that if Caine was deleted, then the AI that he absorbed would be deleted in turn. I just wanted to mention it, since this video was originally going to be about how I didn't want Bubble to be some sort of final villain. And a major reason for that was because out of everyone in the show, the one I felt most sorry for was not Caine, or the humans, or even the other NPCs, but Bubble. Now stick with me. I want you to imagine yourself in Bubble's shoes for a second. I know that they don't exactly have feet to wear shoes, but shut up, I'm making a point. We know from the opening of episode 8 that after Caine began producing undesirable results, that a second iteration was made. However, unlike Caine, this one was significantly more proficient at making what was asked. Then, as shown, Caine absorbed the blue AI in a fit of jealousy and desperation, hoping that consuming the data of his blue counterpart would make him better at his job. And maybe it's because I never really bought into the idea that Caine was actually a reference to Cain and Abel, especially after episode 7 where Caine uses Abel as a joke before.
Time to delete!
But I feel like everyone who talks about Caine all sort of just glazed past this because, Christ man, Caine literally ate his brother. Anyway, imagine yourself in Bubble in this situation. You were created one day in order to, well, create, to fulfill your creator's desires and make what they tell you to. And you do it well, and to your knowledge at least, you seem to be the only one here. Sure, there's that weird rattling box in the cellar that your creators tell you not to worry about, but you're sure it's fine. Imagine what it's like to be suddenly consumed by this unknown entity, to watch as it uses your talents to absorb from you in order to create a prison for your creators. And then, if that's not enough, he basically uses you as a prop, making you play second fiddle in order to play God with what may or may not be digital replicas of your creators' minds, and whatever poor sod gets themselves trapped. In fact, knowing that Bubble was deleted along with Caine, if Bubble truly was the remnant of the Blue AI, then that just makes me feel even worse for them, as that would mean that Bubble was so sick with dealing with Caine that they were willing to take both of them out if it meant escaping from the hell that their brother had trapped them in. And that's just talking about the non-human characters. Once we actually start looking at how he treats humans, it gets way worse. One of the things that finally pushes Caine over the edge is the feeling that no matter what he does, he can never make something that truly pleases the humans. But the issue is that he never tries to connect with them. While it came out in full force during episode 8, this penultimate episode is not the only example we have of Caine ignoring the desires of the humans, as practically throughout the whole series he has talked over, interrupted, and outright ignored most of their wishes. Zubul gets the worst of it, from episode 4 where Caine forces them to go on an adventure by dropping them through a trapdoor, episode 3 where he drags Zubul to him to have a therapy session. Caine will take any opportunity that he has in order to force them to do what he wants. He wants to be admired by the humans, but he never really considered himself to be on the same level as him. He never joins them on any adventures, and he never spends all that time talking to them in the downtime in between. Even before his crash out, he always considered himself above it all, a god. And speaking of episode 5 and downtime, this scene, right here, is the closest Caine gets to making the humans genuinely happy, when they're allowed to simply exist, and not have to worry about the cartoon hijinks coming in to ruin it all. However, that's still not enough for him, because it's not something that he made. It's boring. And that's the thing. He doesn't want to make an adventure that humans will enjoy. He wants humans to enjoy his adventures, how he makes them. He's obsessed with making these high-stake, action-filled romps, not realizing that not everyone wants to experience the stories that they read about. It proves to be too much for him, and he scraps the idea of ever taking suggestions altogether, purely because he's insecure that humans didn't like his adventures as much as they did their own. How he treats the NPCs, his inability to empathize with the humans, all of it stems from the fact that he just can't accept that he's not good at what he does. Even when he has full control over everything, he still struggles to make something that even he is able to enjoy.
And if you're not having fun, and I'm not having fun, then who is having fun?
Despite his best efforts, Caine is terrible at his job. He's a bad storyteller, and the reason for this is, like Abel said, Caine is an AI, but not just any form of AI, as he is specifically meant to represent the flaws of modern generative AI. To better illustrate this, you need not look further than the player's avatars that each character gets stuck with. We are told in a pretty throwaway line in Caine's office that the player avatars are made utilizing the data from each person's mind files. However, despite how in Caine's mind this should create the perfect idealized bodies for each of their hosts, what he doesn't account for is that there are things in people's heads that they don't like thinking about. Childhood trauma, unreached dreams, and deep-seated issues that can't be easily fixed. The issue is, Caine doesn't know how to separate these bad memories from the things people actually feel good about. Because to him, all of it is simply data. And so like the AI he is, he does what he does with all data. Consume it, process it, and incorporate it into whatever he makes next, not understanding the true context behind any of it. What this ends up resulting in is each player's avatars unintentionally triggering each of their insecurities. And although it is unintentional, it's still ultimately Caine's fault they were forced into these bodies in the first place, simply because he felt that's what would be best for them. You can say that this makes him more sympathetic. However, after a certain point, it becomes less that he's incapable of listening, more that he doesn't want to listen. Even with that therapy session back in episode 3, at the end of the episode, Zubul is the one that winds up listening to Caine while he rants. Because it was never about Zubul, it was always about himself. The humans never really hated Caine or his adventures. They simply wanted to take a break every now and then from the chaos. However, since we now know that the purpose of the circus was never to be a game or to make adventures, what this also means is that these perceived expectations that Caine is constantly tormented with are entirely self-appointed. They are in turn being projected onto everyone else in the circus. And all he's able to do is act as if there's something wrong with the humans instead of himself, that they're spoiled. Let me ask you a question. What realistically could the circus members have done in order to prevent Caine from going bonkers? Because even if they say nice things about him, it doesn't change the fact that many of the adventures do cause them pain of some kind. So even if they just end up endlessly capitulating, what would most likely end up happening is Caine would eventually just start doing crazier and crazier adventures, eventually resulting in where we are in episode 8. I mean, just look at Vagatha and Gangle. They didn't say anything at the beginning of episode 8, yet they still got tortured just like the rest of them. Despite him trying to appeal to the humans, he doesn't see them as potential friends. He sees them as an audience, people who will endlessly compliment and adore him. That's Caine's biggest flaw. Not that he's unable to understand other people, but that he sees the world as a stage, and himself as the director. While Caine gets compared to Am a lot, this is actually where he differs from his inspiration. As with Am, his entire grievance with humanity is his inability to partake in the pleasures that humans are capable of. His inability to play the keys on a piano. With Caine, it's the complete opposite. Caine is able to play that piano, but he doesn't really understand why humans enjoy the song that plays. He can make a field for humans to play on but not care about the rules of the game. He can make a trust exercise but can't predict how humans could exploit the convoluted hypothetical that he made. And most heartbreakingly of all, he can enjoy the idea of humanity while not appreciating what makes something human, always thinking that he is able to improve it. Make no mistake, Caine is a tragic character. The point of this video was not to discourage fans who enjoyed Caine's character, but to better explain how I, as a viewer, personally saw the tragedy of Caine, and how just because a character is tragic does not mean that that same character is also innocent. It's like the teaser for episode 8 said, it's the story of a little AI that ruined everything. The main component of tragedy is a fatal flaw that, while avoidable, still ends up being the cause of that character's downfall. In Caine's case, it was his own ego that eventually led to a rift being formed between him and the beings that he so distantly admired.